just want to say a few words about Steve Smith, who's speaking today. Steve has over 20 years of experience in outdoor and adventure education, and currently working as the founder for Experiential Consulting and is the chief consultant there as well. Spent a lot of time working with Outward Bound and the Wilderness Risk Managers Conference. You've probably seen him present there. And he'll talk a little bit more about that, so I won't take up any more of your time today. Steve, excited to hear what you have to say today. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Dan, and welcome everyone. I see a bunch of folks have logged on to the webinar, and just want to welcome everyone and say thanks to you, Dan, and to AEE for hosting this webinar series. It's been a lot of fun putting this together. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts here with you all, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I intend to. We're going to talk about building a culture of risk management, specifically the importance of learning from near misses, and a little bit more about me. So as Dan mentioned, I've been working in the outdoor industry for over 20 years. I've been fortunate enough to work with organizations like Outward Bound and the Student Conservation Association. Spent the last 5 years on the steering committee for the Wilderness Risk Management Conference and chaired that conference for the last 3 years as well. So I've had a wonderful opportunity to look at outdoor education and through risk management through a bunch of different lenses. And one of the key things that I've learned in my career is that the best way to manage risk is really to run a quality program. Angie talked about that in her webinar last week, and I'm quite certain that Rev Greg will be talking about that as well next week. So hope that you enjoyed Angie's session if you went to that, and that you'll join us for Rev's session next week as well. That's our overarching theme for this whole series. The best way to manage risk is to run a quality program. One of the things I'm going to be focusing on here today is specifically looking at incident data and how to create a culture that helps you to run a quality program. So we're going to explore incident and near-miss data collection. We're going to look at the role that organizational culture plays in risk management. And then we're going to assess if the way that you are collecting and interpreting your incident and near-miss data is consistent with the organizational culture that you are trying to foster at your program. Before we dive into that, I just want to define some terms so that we're all on the same page. Different programs and different organizations define these things a little differently. So for the sake of our discussion today, an incident is could be a medical situation, an injury or an illness. It could be a behavioral incident of some sort that threatens self or others. It could be vehicle damage. It could be equipment damage. It could even be a legal infraction of some sort that occurs during the workday or during program time. So those are all examples of things that would constitute incidents. Let's talk about near misses and make a distinction. And it's important that you define and make that distinction in your program. OSHA defines a near miss as an occurrence in which no property was damaged and no one was injured, but given a slight shift in time or position, damage or injury easily could have occurred. So that's the official OSHA definition of a near miss, and it actually works pretty well for our purposes today as well. So a tree falls and hits a tent full of campers, that is an incident. That tree falls and just misses that tent, that would be a near miss. I also want to share with you this definition of risk management culture that I recently got from a guy named James Reason that we're going to talk more about in this presentation. And I love this. He says that a risk management culture is established attitudes, values, and practices where risk management is revered, promoted, and treated as a priority. It starts at the top and permeates throughout an organization. James Reason is an author, and he has many books. One of them is Managing the Risks of Organizational Accidents. I would recommend this book to any of you who want to learn more about the topic today. And he states, and this might be an overarching concept for our talk today, it's worth pointing out that if you are convinced that your organization has a strong safety culture, I think you can see where this is going, you're almost certainly mistaken. So it's a goal to be a goal to be sought after, but one that's quite difficult to actually accomplish. So that's from his book, Managing the Risks of Organizational Accidents. Highly recommended. So at this point, we're going to have our first interactive poll. And Dan, if you could pull that poll up, that would be great. And ask you to choose your answer as best you can for your organization about these two questions. And we'll just have a little background music while you think about that. And to me, it looks like 70% of the organizations represented here today have some kind of a formal process for reporting incidents and near misses. Most of those are paper. Another 22% has the same thing online in some fashion. Some organizations don't have that formal process. Most importantly, what do you do when you get a near miss that has been reported to you? And it looks like almost half of you use some kind of a learning, use some learning from that near miss to meaningfully inform changes to policy and training. And that's a really good sign. In some cases, you're unsure how those near misses are used. And we want to pay attention to that. We're going to talk more about the value of near misses and why that's an important opportunity to inform and learn as an organization. So thanks for that poll, Dan. That was great. Let's keep moving along. So Daniel Kahneman is an author who also has some great books. Won't dig into all those examples, but he says that confidence is a feeling determined mostly by the coherence of a story and by the ease with which it comes to mind, even when the evidence for that story is sparse and unreliable. So I'll let you think for a moment what that quote means to you. In my mind, it relates to this idea of the lessons that we're learning from our incident data. When you stare into the tea leaves of the incidents that have happened at your organization or the near misses that have occurred, we can, sometimes we can learn the wrong things if we don't analyze that data effectively. Let's look at a funny example. Here, lightning hits a tree nearby these two hikers, and one is worried and thinks that they should go inside. The other one has been reading too many statistics and has learned the wrong lesson. And he's saying, oh, now that that lightning has struck, our chances of getting hit are really slim. Let's keep going. Unfortunately, this is a good example of misuse or learning the wrong thing from incident data. So when you collect those incidents and near misses, or when your organization gets to the point where you're beginning to do that, are you using that incident data to challenge your assumptions and create meaningful learning or not? Let's look at some examples of that. I think it's fair to say that most of us would assume that certain program activities and certain environments are inherently more likely to lead to some kind of a hazardous situation or thereby lead to more incidents. That's an assumption that we have. And interestingly enough, incident data from Outward Bound over the last 4 years are from 2008 to 2011. Those 4 years, that data did not show any statistical correlation between incident rate and location or course type. So they were meaningfully using their data to dispel this assumption that certain program activities or environments were naturally going to result in more incidents. A study that was presented at the 2007 Wilderness Risk Management Conference examined this question. Do more experienced instructors have fewer incidents and evacuations? And I would assume, before reading this study, I would assume that more experienced folks are going to have more skills and talent and experience that would help them to prevent incidents from happening on their programs. And interestingly, that is not what the data indicated based on this study. As you can see, we'll look at one example here. These are the team weeks, so the collective weeks of experience between the instructors on these courses. As the team weeks of experience increased, we see on the far right column, the evac rate actually starts at 116, it goes up to 131, and then down again as they get more experience. So there's this interesting increase in incident and evac rates as they gain more experience. Same thing with the individual course leader, the most experienced senior person in charge. As that person's weeks of experience increase, again, we see this disproportionate and somewhat surprising increase in evac rates, where the most experienced course leaders are having the most evac. So what that means is that there was no significant relationship between the course leader or the instructor team seniority and corresponding evacuations and risk management incidents. It may be, however, that those more experienced folks were doing a better job of preventing catastrophic, high consequence incidents from occurring. It also tells me that the program had well-established practices and trainings, policies, leadership, and culture that allowed them to effectively manage risks on their programs, not in a way that was just tied to the staff seniority or regardless of the staff seniority. Those other mechanisms that they had in place allowed them to effectively manage risk. So that's worth noting. So really, the essential question for me is, how can you use these incidents, the near misses that are occurring on your programs, to reduce the likelihood of a catastrophic, a severe incident from taking place? So on to participant poll number 2. And what I'd like you to do is consider this question. I don't know if you actually know the answer or if you just instinctively want to take a stab at it, but the question is pretty specific. What is the ratio of near misses to minor incidents to major incidents on your programs that are reported annually? So this annual ratio, for example, 3 to 5 to 8 would be an example of a ratio. If you could try to think about the answer to that question and then pick the answer here in the quick poll that you think best fits your program. Okay, so you should have the results to that quick poll, and predominantly we're seeing that folks get a few near miss reports, but they mostly hear about the more serious actual incidents that occur. That's pretty common. That's not a surprise. Some organizations say they don't have any near misses really. They only hear about the most critical incidents. Some say that they don't get near miss reports at all. One doesn't collect any data, one's not sure. And about a quarter say that they have more near misses reported than actual incidents. So that's an interesting result to that poll. Thank you for showing that. Let's move on and look at how we use information like this. So a guy named Frank Bird back in 1969 did a formal study. He had access to millions of pieces of data, incident reports from different industries. This was not specific to the outdoor industry. This was looking at a wide variety of incident types across different industries. And he came up with this principle that's referred to as the safety triangle. And we're going to look at the ratios that he found in this study. And it was pretty interesting to see. For every one serious injury, there were 10 minor injuries. There were 30 instances where some kind of equipment damage or property damage took place. And moving on to the near misses, shockingly, his study found 600 near misses for every one serious injury that took place. Now, why does that matter? Why do we care about that? To me, the importance of near misses is the factors that cause near misses are the same factors that cause incidents and critical injuries to take place. So in other words, the near misses are opportunities to correct the causes that could cause those incidents to occur. If you've been to the risk management conference in the last handful of years, you may have had the opportunity to be introduced to this interesting matrix that was put together by Jed Williamson. He was the editor of Accidents in North American Mountaineering, which many of you are probably familiar with. And he put together these common causes of accidents. And they're in 3 columns. There's unsafe conditions, unsafe acts, and errors in judgment. So I'm not going to dwell on this specific resource right now. I would encourage you to look this up and check this out if you're interested in applying this to your program or to staff training, or to create some common language in your program around potential causes of accidents. I do want to use it just in order to illustrate a concept. So we're going to look at an example here that has to do with equipment and inadequate instruction. And this exciting photo here is the heart of that quick story that I'll share. So this is an actual photo from an outdoor education program that took place in the Southwest. The students were using a Whisper Light stove, so white gas, MSR Whisper Light stove, and you need to prime the stove before it will fire up. So you need to light a small amount of fuel and heat up the element of the stove so that it will convert the liquid gas into a gaseous form for the stove to work. While they were priming their stove, it flared up. The students didn't respond appropriately, and they simply flung this flared up stove across the campsite, where it immediately caught their tent on fire. And instead of putting out that fire, they took this photograph so that you could log onto this webinar and have an opportunity to learn about incidents, near misses, and culture of risk management at an organization. So I would like to thank those students for having the presence of mind to take this photo so that you, yeah, thanks, Brian, I agree. It was very thoughtful of them to do that. So the real heart of the story, however, is when they investigated the stove later to figure out what had gone wrong, they realized that the little rubber O-ring that seals the fuel bottle to the fuel pump had a bunch of cracks in it. It had been stored outside or in a really cold environment over the winter, and had a bunch of dry rotted cracks in that little O-ring. So they reported that back to their headquarters. At that point, they went into their warehouses across the country. This was a national program, so they went in the warehouses and looked, and lo and behold, they found dozens of other fuel bottles with those same dry rotted cracked O-rings. And for 16 cents per fuel bottle, they were able to replace all those proactively. And probably, we don't know because these instances didn't occur, but we can imagine that had they not done that, that could have led to more burnt tents, more burnt students, bad incidents, who knows, forest fire, who knows what could happen. So by reporting that one incident, they were able to use that to statistically decrease the opportunity and the probability of those other incidents occurring across their network. And that would apply whether you're a tiny little program or a big national organization like the one where this occurred. So just wanted to share that story with you. And the quote at the top about accidents starting in town, I love that because it reminds us that in this case, the accident that happened here with these students on this program actually started in town before they even arrived on their course, by the manner in which that equipment was stored and monitored and issued. And then through some faulty equipment and some inadequate instruction about what to do when a flare-up occurs, we had the combination of factors that went into this tent going up in flames, and all of you having the opportunity to learn from their experience so that you don't have to repeat that yourself. So I hope that's just a good little example for you of learning, creating a culture of learning from incidents and near misses in a way that can statistically decrease the opportunity for others to occur. Simple example. So back to Jed's matrix again. If we can identify and minimize those things that are causing accidents, we can reduce the likelihood of a critical or a serious incident from taking place. This poor lad is staring at this box that has fallen mysteriously out of the sky, and he's saying to himself, oh, it's just a near miss, lucky me, without realizing that whatever caused that first box to fall is also causing more to fall. So again, an opportunity for him to have made a better choice there. So we're going to move to the culture part of this presentation, which is sort of the heart of some of the key stuff that I'd like you to take away. And cultivating what James Reason calls a safety culture, and what I would call a risk management culture, has to do with overcoming some natural barriers that are in place for individuals and for organizations. So we're going to look at some of the key elements. James Reason, again, he's the author we quoted at the beginning. He's got a bunch of books about these cultural aspects of creating a culture of safety. And James Reason identifies 5 key elements in a safety culture, as he calls it. And we're going to look at those one at a time. So the first key thing is an informed culture. This means that the people at the very top, the executive director, the board of directors, the folks who work in the office, they are informed. They know what's happening in the field, and they care, and they want to know what's happening in the field. In other words, they're not buffered between what's happening in the field and what they pay attention to in their work. A reporting culture. So this means that there is a method, a process, a system for incident reporting, and a loop that allows people to learn from what's happening in those incident reports that come in. A just culture, and we're going to spend a minute on this one because it's a crucial one. So a just culture basically means that people are treated fairly. If you report an incident, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get in trouble for doing that, but nor does it automatically mean that you're amnestied from potential responsibility for what's in that incident report. It simply means that you'll be treated fairly, you have a responsibility to report what's happening, and that it will be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and that the organization will do the right thing. Sometimes that means that there is some accountability. If policies were intentionally broken, if negligent carelessness took place, there's all kinds of examples you can come up with where there should be some kind of accountability for what happened. In most cases, it was an error. It was someone that made a mistake. An error of some sort happened. Maybe it was just bad luck, and there's still a chance to learn from that incident that occurred. So in a just culture, people aren't fearful of submitting or discussing or being honest about what's going on in the field. It's an environment in which they feel comfortable being supported in being treated fairly, no matter what happened there. A flexible culture means that there's no hierarchy that's going to get in the way of people speaking up about safety concerns. We sent around a packet of some case studies for you to look at in advance of this webinar today. And the second case study was a medical situation with a charged nurse and a doctor that were having a disagreement about how to best treat a patient. And in this case, there was a flexible enough culture in that hospital where the charge nurse could speak up against the bad judgment that she thought was being demonstrated by the doctor. And it was a flexible enough culture that actually rewarded her for doing that and doing the right thing in this case, medically speaking. So finally, a learning culture. And when incidents occur, there's a crucial question. Are we going to look back at that incident in the past and try to ascribe blame or responsibility, or are we going to use that incident to keep it from happening again? So looking back and blaming, or looking ahead and preventing, is the crucial distinction there. And a learning culture is one that's going to use the intent is to use incidents that have occurred or near misses that have occurred to keep those things from recurring in the future. So those things together collectively add up to create a safety culture, according to James Reason. So that leads us to poll number 3. Dan, if you could fire that up. So it looks like most organizations, according to this poll, are striving to balance prevention and accountability, or safety and accountability, and that's learning and accountability. I think that's it's great to see that. In some cases, it looks like 33% seek to understand what happened and focus on the learning from the incident. Doesn't look like anyone is strictly trying to find out who is accountable for the incident. And some simply aren't sure about the intent behind their process. So thanks, that was an interesting little core sample of your different organizational cultures. Let's keep moving along. On this topic of a just culture in particular, there is a great book by a guy named Sidney Decker. And as you can see by the subtitle of Just Culture, it's all about balancing safety and accountability. He wants to do both. And it's not about retribution or judging, it's about learning. And he really digs into this concept, I think, in a deeper and more focused way than James Reason's book does. So would highly recommend both of those resources for you. Okay, so we're going to keep going. And the other case study that was sent around was the hypothetical South Texas State University situation. And we're going to just review that video for 2 minutes and then discuss it in the context of culture.
A few years ago, the Geology Club from Southern Texas State University, STSU, took a trip to explore the geology of the Colorado Plateau near Moab, Utah. 6 students, the father of one of the students, and the Geology Club advisor, who was a geology professor at STSU, drove to Moab and camped at a campsite near the Colorado River in early June. On the first day that the STSU group was in camp, they watched a group of teenagers wade across the river to a sandbar. The teenagers marked the crossing location by placing a stick in the sand. The next day, the college students explored the Moab region and made chili for dinner. While the chili was simmering, several of the STSU students waded about 50 yards across the river to a sandbar. A 22-year-old community college transfer student, Zhang Wei, stayed in camp to write in his journal and keep an eye on the chili while the other students went across the river. At 4:42 p.m., Zhang's journal reads, "Wade in the Colorado River." 2 students watched as Zhang entered the river, but he wasn't in the place that the teenagers had marked with the stick. So one student, Marcy, tried to get Zhang to go further upstream for a better crossing. When they told Zhang he was not in the right spot, he responded by telling them that he didn't know how to swim. According to the Grand County Sheriff's report, Zhang was a short distance from the bank when he either lost his footing or stepped into a deep pool and struggled to stay afloat. As soon as Zhang disappeared, Marcy jumped into the river and swam to a point where she thought she would intercept Zhang, but didn't find him. The father, who was on the trip, also jumped into the river and floated for about a mile looking for Zhang. Other students in the group looked for Zhang while Marcy frantically drove a vehicle to a place where she could get cell reception and called 911.
So my question for you folks, and first of all, thanks to Angie Moline at Educate Wild for that remarkable case study and that beautifully animated learning opportunity there. So thanks, Angie, that's fantastic. Part of her larger risk management 101 training, by the way. So my question for you, based on this case study that we just looked at, is how would an organization with a healthy risk management culture respond if that kind of an incident were to take place? And if you would type some of your ideas, your answers to that question in the chat box, that would be a nice way to quickly, collaboratively share. How would an organization with a healthy risk management culture respond? Lauren says they would make an attempt to fully understand what actually occurred. Francis says we would investigate this decision to cross the river. Kathleen Floberg suggests looking at root cause analysis. What was the underlying reason why they made those decisions? Try to gain an understanding of the preparation process ahead of time. What did they do ahead of the trip that may have led to that incident occurring? Thoroughly investigate, get the facts, look at the incident from all angles. Francis wants looking at policies, participant screening, document what happened from Steve Pace, analyze the contributing factors, look at this incident to fully understand what happened, gather the facts. Lots of great suggestions here. Learn from these factors, debrief, support the family. Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's important. Control the media, document. What can we do to prevent this from recurring? Lots of great ideas. You guys are coming up with some great examples of that. Some good organizational responses that would be indicative of a healthy risk management culture. Your answers here in many ways mirror some of the ones that I came up with. Let's look at those. I would recognize that this was a preventable incident. Strive to learn from it. Put control mechanisms in place for the future, screening, swim tests, policies, training, campsite selection procedures, an emergency response plan, a life jacket if they're going to be swimming. There's lots of potential control mechanisms that could have prevented this from happening. Implement some sort of water safety or situational awareness strategies for that group to use. Advising them about risks in advance, which was apparently something that did not happen in this case. Practice critical incident response exercises so that folks are more prepared to respond for this kind of thing to occur. And I think my answers here really do mirror a lot of the ideas that you folks came up with. So thanks for doing that. So let's say, you are collecting incidents and near misses, and you do want to learn the right lessons, and you do want to use those in order to generate and cultivate the kind of organizational culture that is focused on and is prioritizing risk management like we defined at the very beginning. So some things that you can do that will help your organization learn from incidents and near misses is to actually start at the beginning and clarify your risk management goals and your organizational risk tolerance with input and buy-in from all those different levels. Angie talked about that in her session last week. And I do think that that is a foundational piece of this in your organizational culture. You can't just say we want them to be safe. They will actually never be safe. If you want them to be safe, you need to close down the program and not run it. And that you need to have some more specific and more clear philosophy around risk and your organizational risk tolerance. Clarify that. And then train your employees and your staff and your leaders in those specific goals for your risk management program. Make reporting as barrier-free as possible. We talked about some of the barriers that can be in place. If people have to really jump through too many hoops to report an incident, or if there are technological barriers to doing that, they're not going to do it. And the more barrier-free you can make the report, more pain-free and barrier-free you can make that reporting process, I think the more you'll actually have a chance to hear what's happening. Another key thing is not just to report the incidents to go into some database, but to give the people who actually experienced the incident the best methodology or some sort of a template or a tool for debriefing what occurred. And that should be aimed at learning, not blaming. It should be aimed at what were the root causes? What would be some things we could do to prevent it from happening in the future? What's some key learning that comes from this experience? So that they're not just learning from that incident when the annual report comes out at the end of the year, but they're learning from that incident right then in the moment when you have a chance for that learning to affect what happens the rest of that course or even the rest of that day. So really providing guidance around and role modeling, effective debriefing. Positive reinforcement of incident reports at all levels. When I've had responsibility for this at different organizations, I've tried to do that weekly to a near miss of the week, or some key incident, critical incidents to focus on that have some learning associated with them. And try to really show people that your incident reports are not going into a vacuum. They're being read, they're being used, they're important, and we're using them to learn as an organization. Conspicuous application of incident data to inform policy and training. So I like to make sure that you're not just using the incidents to update your policies or your training, but you're showing the folks who submitted those incidents how they are contributing to making a safer organization. And then transparency of rates and learning, and some sort of a quarterly or annual, or some sort of a regular report that comes out that shows people where their incident data is going and what that means for the organization. So those are just some examples. I'm sure there's more, but those are just some examples of cultural things that you can do to intentionally foster the kind of organizational culture that you're looking for. And yeah, it's basically just an example of risk management culture. One national outdoor education program, using some of the steps in that previous slide, saw their near-miss reports annually increase, as you can see here, from 16 to 162 is basically 10 times the opportunity to learn about what's happening in the field, and 10 times the opportunity to potentially prevent a serious incident from taking place. So all this does not come without some concerns that I would like to share. And I want to show the other side of the coin here. These are some reminders that were passed on to me by Reb Greg, who is the speaker for next week's webinar. And he has provided me a great deal of insight and guidance and mentorship throughout the years to look at all sides of the coin. And some things he reminded me of here that I want to share with you is that when you're putting in place your incident reporting methodology, that it's important to protect student and staff confidentiality and make sure that you're complying with state and federal laws in your reporting process. So I don't want to belabor that one, but that is probably different state to state, and it's a good thing to just pay attention to appropriate and professional levels of confidentiality in your organization. Documenting near misses creates a responsibility on your part to take some kind of action. If you are piling up all these near miss reports or incident reports that have some common elements, some trends that you're seeing, and you are failing to do anything to address or mitigate or appropriately respond to those incidents, then basically all you're doing is making, Reb would say, a paper trail of issues that you have failed to address, and that's not a good thing. So I would just remind you that as you ramp up your near miss and incident reporting culture, you also ramp up your obligation to appropriately respond to those incidents that you're seeing. Finally, and this is an interesting one, and it's a little counterintuitive. I see some questions coming in that I will get to as we go along. This last bullet point here is making sure that the leadership of the organization or the board or the funders or whomever will have access to your incident rates will need to be prepared for the likelihood that your total incidents will increase. If we go back to that previous slide that shows, going from 16 near misses to 162, at first glance, that would look like a bad thing. It would look like, oh, what's wrong? What are we doing wrong out there? That could be cause for some anxiety. And in fact, most likely those 162 near misses and more were already happening, but we just weren't hearing about them. So you need to prepare your leadership and the board for the likelihood that incident rates may increase as you focus on it as a part of your organizational culture. And you can use that iceberg safety triangle that I showed you earlier as an example of why we want to know about the near misses. They're cheap lessons. They're opportunities to fix things that could otherwise be critical issues for the organization. And an increase in near misses is not a bad thing as I see it. So those are just some reminders. I would say another caution is don't miss Reb's webinar next week. He's going to talk a lot about the legal side and the liability related side of a lot of the stuff that Angie and I have presented. He's going to remind you that the best way to manage risk is to run a quality program. So we've covered a lot here. We've covered a lot of terrain in this webinar today. And just revisiting some of the specific educational outcomes, wanted to explore how collecting and interpreting your incident and near-miss data can create opportunities for learning. I want to examine the role that your organizational culture plays in managing risk, and give you a chance to assess if the way that you're collecting your data is consistent with the culture that you are trying to foster at your program. And I have a fourth ulterior motive, which was to inspire you to connect with your peers and other professional development opportunities like these AEE webinars, the Wilderness Risk Management Conference, working with consultants and attorneys to help you build the risk management systems and culture that you desire. So my main question for you at this point is what is it that, how can you apply some of the concepts from this presentation today to your organization? What questions do you have about using incidents and near misses to create the kind of culture that you're looking for in your organization? Let's take some questions in the Q&A. You can go ahead and chat. Dan, do you want them to chat their questions right in the chat box here?
Yeah, we'll just keep using the chat box.
Okay. Can you provide a document to show an example of near-miss reports? Sure. After the presentations, after the webinar series is over, we're going to send out a follow-up sort of a additional resources document for folks, and we can include some language in there and some thoughts about that would illustrate examples of near-miss reports, Leslie. And there's lots of simple ones that we can provide for you. Are there ready-made databases for tracking incidents and near misses? I can tell you that Rick Curtis at Princeton University and OutdoorEd.com is getting ready to launch a database that he has developed. So that's one thing you could take a look at, OutdoorEd.com. Rick Curtis has the incident near-miss reporting database that he's really been cultivating over the last few years. And there's probably other ones that you can buy off the shelf. I don't know that you need to buy anything expensive. I think it's more important to build one that really fits your organization, looks at the appropriate kind of environment and activities and the kinds of incident data that you're looking for. It could be quite different from one organization to the next. So I would suggest start by getting an assessment of what kind of information you feel like you would need from the field, and see if you need, if you can build something from there. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for attending. Let's see. Have organizations found online reporting to be more useful than paper reporting? I've had difficulty getting staff to fill out paper incident reports, although the forms are in a central location. Yeah, I mean, there's a fundamental question of, folks are in the back country or in a really remote area, they may not be able to do it in any way other than a paper version. And in that case, if you have a digital version of that back at the office, someone's going to have to transcribe the paper documents into or submit them in the digital format. And in the end, I really would suggest having some kind of a digital database for your incident reports if you're able to manage that. It's really going to allow you to slice and dice and look at that data through a variety of lenses and sort by activity or environment, separate the near misses from the incidents, look at certain chunks of time or program types, and really being able to sort your data is going to make it a lot more useful for you, and create more of a window into meaningful data than having it in a paper form. If paper form is the best, is a step towards that, or if it's paper or nothing, then certainly paper incident reports are better than none at all. I hope that's helpful. Any suggestions for ways to make staff and participants more aware of what near misses look like? It seems like we often deal with situations where only the senior staff are recognizing that there was a near miss. I think there's a lot in that question, and I would unpack it a couple different ways. I wonder if the senior staff really are the only ones recognizing if there's a near miss, or if they're the only ones who feel confident enough or comfortable enough or secure enough to bring those things up. And so, the first question is there an organizational culture or environment in which the new folks feel like they would be rewarded, or it would be safe, for them to submit near miss reports? A lot of people, their first instinct is, what did I do wrong? How do I need to submit this? Am I going to get in trouble? And whatever you can do from staff training, the very first day, to help people understand that submitting incidents and near misses is not a pathway to firing you. It's actually part of your job and your responsibility to let us know what's happening in the field, and to give us a window into that, and to give others a chance to learn from your experiences. So, I would suggest, that's where that organizational culture piece really comes into play. And the other part of Colin's question is, suggestions for ways to make staff more aware of what near misses look like. And what we did at the beginning of this presentation was really defined it. And I think you need to have a definition in your organization that clearly defines the distinction. When does a near miss become an incident? And to teach to that. I created a quiz a couple years ago for some folks at a program I was working in, and it would give them that definition, and then about 20 different examples of kinds of things that were happening, and they had to distinguish, is this a reportable incident? Is this a near miss? Or is this just someone doing their job, and this is naturally a part of an outdoor program, and it's not reportable? So coming up with some tools like that and teaching to some of those different shades of gray, I think can help to create focus on near miss reporting and common language in your program, and it can help you to generate that kind of learning from those incidents. So it doesn't change overnight. You can see that example we gave. It took 4 years for that one program to go from 16 to 162 near misses. So it's a slow process of culture change, and it does not happen overnight. I'm going to keep going down the questions. Adam, he asks, if using incidents and near misses for training, what precautions should be taken for confidentiality? We would use it for training with current staff. Well, I think it's super important to use actual incidents and near misses from the previous year to train the next year's staff about recent challenges, things that have come up, things they can learn from, to keep it fresh. And there's a good chance that the person who that incident happened to might be in the room with those new people being trained. And so anytime you're using case studies or actual incidents, you want to frame it really respectfully. You want to do it confidentially. You want to say that the goal of our organization is to learn from our past so that we don't have to repeat it, and that this is not about blaming or judging that person's decision. It's about recognizing that this could happen to any of us. And in fact, it did happen. Just last year, we had the following things occur. And we're here today to look at those stories and do some root cause analysis, ask ourselves, what could we do to prevent it from happening again? And really focus on that prevention piece rather than some sort of oh, that couldn't happen to me. Look at that terrible decision that guy made. That's not the kind of environment that's going to be conducive to a respectful analysis of that case study. So I think just making sure that you frame that really well and to create a safe learning environment for that, to be critical, critically examining while respectfully learning from the incident that occurred. I hope that's helpful. Adam? Standardizing near-miss reporting. I'm going to come back to that one, and we'll include some thoughts around how to standardize in the resources that we send out at the end of the webinar series. Does anyone have good guidelines for what qualifies as a near miss besides, whoa, that was close? That's an interesting question. I think you should really, like we did at the beginning of this webinar, define it for your organization. And if it is an incident, if it's an occurrence where a slight difference in timing or location would have made a difference, to me, that's a near miss. A tree falls across a trail just as the students are approaching, that's a near miss. And a slight difference in their timing or their location would have been a critical incident. So to me, that OSHA definition works pretty well. If others have better definitions than that, please share them here in the chat box. Anyone with suggestions for encouraging more reporting, even with incidents, not just near misses? I will have a trip come back with no incident reports after 2 weeks. So that's pretty common, right? I do think that we don't hear enough about what's actually happening out there, and that you really need to work hard to create the kind of environment, the kind of culture where people see other staff, other senior staff reporting and debriefing and learning so that they see that it's okay for them to do that. I have some mixed feelings about this, but I have seen some organizations take the approach that you need to submit at least one incident report of some type when you come back. And it is whatever the closest call or the biggest challenge or the worst thing that happened on that trip was, even if it's just really minor, you need to, mandatorily, you need to submit something. And that kind of cracks the seal and would lead them to actually submit, 4 or 5 things instead of just the mandatory one. I have some mixed feelings about that, because you really want it to be authentic and genuine and to be part of a learning culture, and it wouldn't have to be mandatory like that, but that is a strategy that I have seen some programs use. Angie shared the link to Rick Curtis's database. Thanks for that, Angie. How do you collect the data in a way that is barrier-free? Suggestions for methodology. Well, if you're in the backcountry, really your only option is paper, unless you have iPads or some other digital way to input the information. In the front country, if people are submitting the information, I think any kind of a database that's going to require them to log on and find a password and fill out a whole bunch of mandatory, needless clicking of boxes that isn't relevant to the incident that happened to them, that is a barrier-full approach. And any way that there are apps, that are increasingly being created, and really simple ways to just submit the fact that the incident occurred. And then perhaps depending on the threshold or the seriousness of the incident, you might have a follow-up, depending on what happened, that requires more data to be submitted. But I think the simplest, most barrier-free methodology at the beginning to get the incident documented, and then to dig into it more deeply depending on the logic of what kind of an incident was it. I hope that's helpful. Here's some ideas from Brian. He's suggesting that Jeff should have the head staff appointed to documentation, nightly staff meetings to discuss the day and assess how things went. Any improvements that could have been made, you can document as near misses and incidents. So creating a routine, creating a ritual, creating a culture on the program where the staff see it as part of their role and their responsibility and their habit to be reflecting back on what they're learning and close calls and incidents so that they can learn from them and document them appropriately. It's absolutely, that's not so much organizational culture as it is in the field culture that represents the organizational culture. So that's a great one, Brian. Thanks. Brian's also suggesting the same thing we said earlier, clear definitions of what requires an incident report. So what constitutes an incident and when would you submit that? Great, good input and contributions here from Brian. And Colin is also sharing this idea of recorded hours versus incidents. So there can be a ratio that you establish with that. And if someone is documenting a lot of hours and no incidents, you know that they're you probably have a blind spot there, and they're probably not recognizing their responsibility to do that. What techniques do other industries use in dealing with the near miss issue? So many. And I think that medical example that we shared in the case study is a good example of how the nursing industry or the human medical industry is creating intentional structure and language, escalating series of phrases you can use to head things off at the pass if there is a dispute about patient safety. Some places have an anonymous mechanism by which you can submit incident reports completely free of any kind of fear of retribution. So I've seen a lot of different approaches that different industries are taking. And maybe Alan will share some more examples like those in the post-webinar resources that we send around. Thanks for that great question. So Dan, it looks like we're kind of coming to the top of the hour here. If there's any last minute burning questions that anyone has, please go ahead and put them in the chat box.
Sure, and one of the great things about the AEE community is it definitely doesn't stop with these webinars and professional development pieces. We really want to encourage continuing conversation and engagement here. You can probably continue this conversation on our Collaborate site. We have an open forum there for posting whatever you like, and we may even start a risk management forum in the near future. And there's a lot of folks, and if you don't feel like you know them, you're welcome to contact, like Steve said, myself, or Steve Smith, or Angie Moline, and we're here to, what is it, the rising tide lifts all the ships, right? As many good programs that are doing appropriate things with incident tracking that are out there, the better we all look to the public and the more respected we'll be as an industry. So let's definitely keep these conversations coming. And like I said, feel free to contact me if you're looking for other folks in this industry to just network with and get those ideas. Maggie, sounds like you would really like to dig into more resources, and I hope to hear from you so we can help you with that.
I'll just wrap up by saying, really enjoyed talking with you all today, and great questions that you all brought, and some great answers that you provided to each other as well. And it's impressive to see all the, the topic today is organizational culture, and I saw evidence of a lot of folks that really do have some great steps and concrete things they're doing to create an intentional organizational culture around risk management, and I hope that continues. If anyone has any specific follow-up questions that you'd like to email me about, I'd be happy to chat with you. And Dan, thanks so much for hosting this, and please join us next week for Reb's session as well. So,
it was my pleasure, Steve, and thanks so much for being here today and for sharing your knowledge with us.